Holy City Center Radio, it is episode 373, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, May 21st, 2025. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. So happy to have you here. I hope you are doing well and you're having a great week so far. Not a whole lot going on in my world, so I'm not going to waste too much time. Let's get into the latest news. So you may remember back in 2021, Charleston passed an ordinance that required permission from police for organized protests, and there was very few exceptions, and I'll get into some of those. So it's been about 4 years later, and now some activists are calling for its repeal, saying that the rule is unconstitutional and often used by police to suppress the First Amendment rights it claims to uphold. A Charleston area social justice advocate recently filed a federal complaint challenging the rule's constitutionality after police denied him a permit for a rally against U.S. Representative Nancy Mace outside her Daniel Island office last month. Some of the reasons they gave for that, because it was during one of the busiest weekends here in Charleston, which is true. It was the bridge run was going on, also the Credit One tennis tournament on Daniel Island is going on at that time. Somerville has an event, which I know is not really in the same area, but a very busy weekend, and that's the reason they gave. But of course, when it comes to First Amendment rights, it shouldn't matter if it's a busy weekend. You should be able to protest, and that's kind of what they're arguing here. So that gentleman's name is William Hamilton III. He said that the city ordinance is vague, it's too broad, and it gives a little bit too much discretion to the police department, where they can just easily deny things for reasons like, it's too busy of a weekend. And look, from a public safety perspective, I certainly understand where they're coming from. Like, hey, we're going to have police all over the city trying to make sure, we have this crush of tourists and residents that are here for all these events. And now you want to hold a protest, which we're going to have to dedicate resources to. I certainly understand their thought process there. But should that be, something that they are able to do? And obviously, William Hamilton and some other advocates say, no, they shouldn't have that discretion. Now, if you're wondering, permit requirements aren't super uncommon, not just in the state, but across this country. It is something that happens for varying reasons. States will say it's, to make sure that there's enough police to ensure the safety of anyone who's protesting or anyone who may be in the area. And again, I certainly get that. But despite the fact that they're uncommon, some legal experts and local advocates say that Charleston's ordinance is one of the most restrictive in the area and is often used to crack down on speech, even when permits aren't issued. Now, since the new rules were adopted, according to the Post and Courier, few permits have been denied by police. I believe the number was something like there was over 200 requests and only 11 were denied. Some were denied because of, like I said, too busy. We went over that. There are others where you're only allowed a certain amount of time frame. Believe it or not, you're not allowed to protest for forever, as many hours as you want. So some were denied when they said, hey, we want to protest for however many hours. Regardless, 11 out of 200 requests, that's certainly not a lot that are being denied, but it's still concerning to some people. Plus, even asking for permits, some people believe, really takes away the whole point of protesting. Now, in addition to the numbers I just mentioned, fewer permits are being requested as well. So it is seen, that's why advocates are saying it's stifling free speech. There's a lot of people who say, what's the point of holding a protest if we have to get a permit and, set the schedule? And, the whole point is you're supposed to protest and disrupt peacefully, of course. And so, people are just not even requesting those permits. So even though a lot aren't being denied, again, just having to request them and having so many restrictions placed on them is a little bit too much for some folks. Now, the Post and Courier asked the Charleston police about this. They said no changes are currently being considered. Of course, it would also, have to involve city council because they set rules. And this is one that they passed back in July 29th of 2021. And if you don't remember, in that time frame, they passed this in the wake of some national uprisings that had followed George Floyd's murder at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer or multiple officers, as well as some local protests after the death of a mentally ill black man at the Charleston County Jail. The changes that officials said were meant to clarify guidelines specifically for organized protests went into effect immediately. So if you're curious, Charleston's ordinance defines First Amendment demonstrations as, quote, assembly, picketing, speech making, marching, protesting, vigil, or religious service, end quote, that draws a crowd to a public place. When that crowd reaches 25 people or more, a permit is required unless the protest is prompted by news that is less than 48 hours old. So there is still that leeway if something happens in the news and people take to the streets immediately to protest, or even the next day. They have 48 hours. So there is that little leeway. But a lot of times with protesting, there is some planning, of course. And, as much as protesters may want to have a peaceful disruption of the day's normal business and to call attention to an issue, by and large, they want it to be peaceful. They don't want anyone to get in any serious trouble. They don't want any violence and things like that. So there is some manner of planning. So even that 48-hour window may not be enough, for people to get together, decide how and where they want to protest. And again, they're just saying, how is this freedom of speech if we have to require a permit and go through all these loopholes? So there's no movement on this yet. It was supposed to be brought up at a city council meeting, but there's been no changes or any indication that this is going to, even be brought up again. I'll certainly keep you posted, but I forgot about this ordinance. It was kind of big in the news when this passed, of course, and there were so many protests going on in 2020 and 2021 that it's just something that I haven't really thought of in a long time, as there hasn't been a ton of, big time protests in this city or in the area, unlike back at that time where we were seeing nationwide protests. So I just wanted to put it out there, let you all know, because I don't think a lot of people realize that, hey, I want to protest. If you decide to, create a Facebook event group and say, tomorrow we're going to protest whatever at this location, you could get in trouble if more than 25 people show up if you didn't request a permit. So just something I wanted you to know for that reason, but also maybe like you think, hey, maybe this is a little too restrictive. Again, I get where they're coming from a public safety standpoint, and I certainly want everyone, whether protesting or not, to be safe. And if protesters cross the line and are violent, they should be held accountable. If people who don't like the protest decide to be violent or whatever, obviously it's great that there's people that can protect anyone who's in danger. I certainly get that. But the amount of restriction seems to be a bit much, and I think there should be some changes. So if you agree, you can contact City Council, whoever your member is, and let them know. All right, we've talked about a lot of the cuts that are happening nationwide by the Trump administration, whether there are people being fired, funding cuts for different departments, and how we've seen, some effects here and there, and also what we need to be on the lookout for. So obviously here in South Carolina, I've talked previously about some projects that were cut, including a project that was supposed to alleviate flooding in the old village of Mount Pleasant that was cut. And now it's unsure how exactly they're going to continue that project, where they're going to get funding from. And of course, when things like this happen, it's going to fall to the taxpayers. And that's going to be the case with FEMA as well, at least barring any changes. If you've been paying attention to the news, you're well aware of whether it's tariffs or whatever. President Trump has a tendency to say things and then reverse course, and then reverse course again. And, so who knows? But as of this recording, there have been cuts proposed and have gone into effect for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. This is the group that comes in after natural disasters. In this area, of course, you're going to think a lot about hurricanes. There was a lot of talk about FEMA and if they were doing a good enough job or not last year when it came to, I think it was Hurricane Helene, although there was another one soon after that was affecting North Carolina, specifically in the mountain areas. And although that was North Carolina, South Carolina could be facing a hurricane, of course. We all know that. And regardless of how significant a storm may be, we might not have enough money, to really take care of things, or at least not as much money as we were planning on if something catastrophic were to happen. And of course, as I mentioned, where will that cost fall on? Well, if the city, county, state, however it ends up working, it's going to get passed on to the taxpayers, of course, or it's going to be taken out of another fund that we're already paying for and placed into this one, which then, of course, takes money out of whatever other fund. It's going to fall on us either that way, or because there's not going to be any funding from the government to assist us if something catastrophic were to happen, we might have to rely on our own insurance if we have any, for our homes or cars or whatever else. And then it falls to us in that way as well. And this isn't a partisan attack on the Trump administration. This story, which there's a link in the show notes, includes quotes from local leaders on both sides of the aisle. So, for instance, Republican Larry Krabrowski, who is the vice chair of the Charleston County Council, said essentially we'd be on our own if we were hit by any sort of disaster. And the funding, although there's some, it's not as much as we were expecting or as much as has been available in the past. So currently, South Carolina has to pay $9.6 million in disaster recovery before they can receive federal aid. However, some local folks, including Justin Pierce, who is the director of emergency management, said that he could see that number rising based on these cuts. And to fill in those gaps, the Charleston County Council may have to look to taxpayers for assistance, as I just mentioned. So what can we do? Not a whole lot. You can certainly contact your representative, your senator, whoever, your representatives are on the federal level, especially, that, hey, we don't want these cuts in FEMA. And although in some instances it may be too late or it's just not going to matter, at least it's being put out there. And hopefully, especially those who have Trump's ear, can maybe talk to him or, people in his orbit to maybe change his mind on this. So there's that. But as far as taking care of yourself, Pierce, who again is the director of emergency management for Charleston County, said that he encourages individuals to check their insurance policy, make sure their coverage is guaranteed. So if you own a home, that's going to be the big one, of course. Check your insurance and what would happen in the case of a hurricane or any other disaster. He also suggested talking to neighbors about what their plans are in case of an emergency. That just is more of a good to know sort of thing. But unfortunately, even if you do have good coverage through insurance, that doesn't mean everything is going to be covered in a disaster. And even if you are, lucky enough to have whatever damage you may have covered, that doesn't help out the rest of the area. So certain buildings, roads, other properties, things in the area, they're going to need funding for recovery, to clear debris, all the stuff we saw that happened in North Carolina when they had the normal funding that they were planning on for FEMA, how bad and disastrous it still was. And now imagine that happening here and we have even less access to funds. It could be very, very bad. Not trying to sound the alarm or be alarmist, but just something to think about, keep an eye on, look into your insurance coverage. And again, reach out to anyone in politics on the federal level, whoever your representatives are, and just say you're concerned about this. And if there's anything they can do to please do so. Again, I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but it's better than just saying, forget it. We're just going to have to deal with it. This is the way things are. All right, so let's end on a fun note. You may have already seen this. It happened a couple Sundays ago. Comedian John Oliver, who used to be on The Daily Show on Comedy Central, has for now over a decade had a show on HBO, or whatever they're calling themselves now, called Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. Similar to The Daily Show in that it's a look at the news in a humorous way, but he does dive deep into a topic in each episode. And it can be really serious. It can be eye-opening. It can be scary. It can be maddening about some of the things that they've exposed or, shine a little bit more of a light on that we as residents here in this country may not know about. But they do have a lot of funny, in addition to, making jokes during these serious pieces, again, a la like The Daily Show or what have you. They also have some funny bits, to try to lighten the mood. And, there's all manner of things that you can go look online and find. Well, one of the kind of funnier, more lighthearted pieces they did happened a couple Sundays ago. And it was all about minor league baseball, specifically the promotions and, the names of teams and things like that, and how there's a lot of funny and amazing team names out there in minor league baseball, how there's crazy promotions and how both, sometimes rebranding, creating a new logo or doing a promo night can go wrong sometimes, and how even if it goes a little wrong, it can turn out to be good. And again, go watch the clip from the show. It is really funny to see some of the things in other places of the country where their promos went a little askew. But in any event, the whole point of this episode was John Oliver and his team wanted a minor league team to reach out to them and basically give them complete control for a rebranding and a theme night and stuff like that. Well, no, the Charleston Riverdogs were not chosen, but the Riverdogs were mentioned in the first episode when he was announcing this plan to help out a team with a promotion. Now, I don't know if the Riverdogs reached out to the show. A lot of minor league teams did, apparently, but the reason they were brought up was because of a theme night they did a few years back. Back in 2018, they hosted a Helen McGuckin night. Who is Helen McGuckin? Well, this is a woman who just drove by the park, didn't even go to a game, and left a 2-star Google review that only said just drove by. So this person didn't go to a game and still gave the ballpark / the Riverdogs a 2-star review. So what they decided to do, let's host a night dedicated to the woman that left that review, and let's see if we can turn her 2-star review into something better. Specifically, of course, they would want 5 stars. They had worked out this amazing promotion. They were going to hold it on July 9th, and they still ended up holding it despite the fact that this Helen McGuckin kind of backed out at the last minute. Well, they've already been advertising this promo. They had stuff ready. So they just had someone within like the team offices, like the management offices or whatever. They had this woman pretend to be Helen McGuckin, and they still went forward with the whole, event. And so it was funny because I do remember when this promotion was announced back in 2018, and I thought it was pretty funny then. And it was great to see the show highlight it when they were talking about minor league baseball. So go check it out. Something fun, something different, something nice, to kind of offset some of the other stories and things going on in the world. And speaking of, the Riverdogs, of course, are back in season. If you didn't already know that, they've had some amazing seasons over the last, 3-4 years now, including winning multiple titles. But even if they're not in the title hunt, and just like many other minor league teams across the country, it's such a fun and usually pretty affordable night. You can go. Ballpark is always full of energy. There's almost always some sort of promotion going on. If there's not, there's always going to be some fun foods for you to try out. Whatever else, in between innings, there'll be contests and things. And so it's always a great time. You don't need to know really anything about the team. You don't even really need to know much about the sport. That's what makes minor league baseball so fun. It's just so wacky and off the wall and silly. But it's usually a really good time for, whether it's family, friends, date night, whatever it may be. I always enjoy going to the Riverdogs games. And to that, the same can be said for other minor leagues across the country, including here. South Carolina Stingrays do a great job when they're in season, and same with the Charleston Battery, who also you should check out and are in season right now. So go see the Riverdogs, go see the Battery, enjoy those theme nights and silly things they do, and go check out that clip. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Soundsystem for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. I will be back with you on Friday. I'm already looking forward to it. But until then, good night and good luck.